There are times when the pain you feel doesn't come from being rejected outright but from feeling unclaimed. Picture walking into a room where no one is mean, yet no one truly reaches out to you either. People are polite, conversations happen, life flows, but underneath it all lies a crushing sense of standing just outside the center of everything. You watch others click effortlessly, connecting, laughing, and building lives that seem to move forward with ease, and a tightening grows inside you. It's not shallow envy, it's exhaustion from always arriving where everyone else already belongs. You've prayed about it, opened yourself up, adjusted in ways you wouldn't admit to others. You've stepped into spaces with hope, lowered your expectations, smiled through discomfort, stayed longer than peace would allow, yet the same questions haunt your nights. Why does it always feel like I'm near people but never fully inside what they share? Why am I always on the edge? Why does my life feel delayed, muted, and out of rhythm with those around me? If you linger with these questions, beneath them another voice forms. Maybe you were never meant to matter the way you dreamed. Maybe you're too much in the wrong places and not enough in the right ones. Maybe the reason you feel unseen is because you're not remarkable after all. But what if that conclusion is wrong? What if the ache you feel is not proof against your future but a sign of it? What if what you've called abandonment is actually selection? What if the places where no one knew what to do with you aren't evidence that you don't belong, but that what God is doing in you can't be grasped by every room? What if those nights when no one called, those prayers that seemed to vanish into the ceiling, those long seasons when life felt paused, what if all of it isn't God pushing you away but pulling you inward? Right now, you may feel late to the party, like everyone else received a map while you linger in the hallway, wondering why no door has opened for you. But beneath this season lies a truth that may feel unsettling because it contradicts all the pain stories. Your solitude isn't random. Your silence isn't empty. Your hiddenness isn't a judgment. It's preparation. And if you can bear to face it long enough, you might discover that the very places you thought disqualified you became the crucibles where your true formation began. The wilderness of being overlooked doesn't erupt in dramatic collapse. It grows from quiet noticing, a delay here, a missed invitation there, a message that once got swift replies now left unread, a conversation where you realize no one truly grasped the weight of your words. Then one day the loneliness slowly shapes itself into something undeniable. You can't just chalk it up to being busy anymore. It's a subtle loneliness, not loud and overwhelming, but delicate, seeping into the tiniest cracks of everyday life. You feel it during the doctor home from a social event, that quiet moment when you instinctively reach for your phone, only to realize there's no one you really want to text, because no one feels close enough to truly hold what's inside you. It shows up when you scroll through other people's lives and feel like you're watching them move through a door that softly closes just before you can step inside. This is where the inner voice becomes dangerous. You wonder, God, did you skip over me? If you are truly with me, why does everything feel so empty? If you are shaping something within me, why does it feel as barren as it looks? Loneliness is tricky because it does more than just hurt, it tells a story. It interprets silence as accusation, turns waiting into disqualification, and transforms being unseen into proof that you're less valuable than you thought. So loneliness isn't just emotional pain, it's a battle of interpretation. The first thing it attacks isn't your schedule or circumstances. It strikes at your very identity. That's why Scripture often places God's people in seasons where the crowd disappears just before their assignment arrives. Take Noah before the flood. For days, no one could affirm his calling because no one saw what he saw. His obedience looked foolish. There was no applause, no peer validation, no external signs that he was doing the right thing. Just God's instructions and the humiliation of looking strange until the season was revealed. Or consider John on Patmos, cut off from familiar community and the usual ways he ministered. To others, it looked like exile or confinement. But in that stripped-down place, revelation deepened. The space around him shrank, and heaven's voice grew louder. This pattern is important. God often silences the noise before making his voice clear. He lets the room go quiet before entrusting you with greater responsibility. Many things can grow when seen by a crowd, but identity grows where no one is there to affirm it. In those forgotten spaces, hidden dependencies become apparent. You discover how much you relied on feedback, how much you needed responses, and how deeply you craved visible proof that your life was advancing. The wilderness exposes what applause had covered. Painful though that exposure is, it is mercy, because God cannot build lasting purpose on a soul dependent on external validation. This lonely season sparks the first great shift. Prayer stops being polished and instead becomes honest. Scripture ceases to be just a tool for quick comfort, it becomes sustenance, actual bread for the soul. Silence stops feeling like a punishment and begins to feel like a sacred space, where something real is quietly unfolding, even when no dramatic events are visible yet. You begin to realize that the wilderness was never designed to erase you. Instead, it was created to strip away everything that kept you from hearing clearly. Before God entrusts someone with visible responsibility, he often leads them through invisible formation. Before granting public impact, he addresses private dependency. Before surrounding a person with support, he reveals who they are when no one else is around to affirm it. This loneliness didn't come to destroy you. It came to simplify and refine you. When you feel too different to fit in, there's another kind of ache, sometimes even deeper than empty space. It's the ache of being physically present but spiritually misplaced. You find yourself sitting at the table, attending church, standing alongside family, laughing when everyone else laughs. You know the appropriate responses, how to keep things smooth and comfortable. Yet inside, there's a subtle dissonance, something in you never fully settles. You're there, but you're not rooted there. Included, but not truly located. And after repeating this experience enough times, that dissonance evolves into a quiet, personal question. Why do I always feel slightly off-center wherever I go? That question changes everything. It adjusts your behavior, making you edit yourself in small ways. You smooth out your sharp edges. You soften your convictions before they might make anyone uncomfortable. You learn how to be agreeable without revealing your true self. You become skillful at belonging just enough to avoid rejection, while still hiding the parts of you that could disrupt the room if they were fully seen. This strategy may work temporarily, but it comes with a cost that's deeper than most realize. Over time, partial belonging turns into its own kind of loneliness. You become loved for the version of yourself that fits in, not the version that is true. And maintaining that gap grows exhausting. Hannah experienced a loneliness much like this. Even though she was surrounded by religious structure, married, present, and visible enough to be noticed, she was deeply misunderstood. Her pain was often misinterpreted, her tears were misread. Even in the very place where she should have felt safest, the inner life that mattered most remained largely unseen by others. Yet it was precisely in that misunderstood place that heaven responded. God has always had a way of meeting people at moments when their pain feels least translatable to those around them. Consider Jeremiah, called while young, burdened with a message that his generation would not naturally celebrate. He didn't fit the emotional climate of his time. The weight inside him was too heavy, too costly, too inconvenient. Yet his sense of not fitting was not a flaw. It was a marker. This is where loneliness transforms into something sacred if you allow it. Not because loneliness is good on its own, but because it exposes the difference between being universally accepted and being specifically called. There are seasons when the reason you feel different everywhere is not because you belong nowhere, but because you are being prepared for a unique purpose. Sometimes, the pain of feeling broken isn't because there is something wrong with you. Instead, it's because you're trying to measure your sense of belonging by standards, or runes, that were never meant to hold your unique purpose. The pressure mounts. Do you keep adjusting yourself to remain easy to accept, or do you risk misunderstanding to stay true to who you are? This tension is brutal. The human heart longs for obedience and comfort simultaneously. It wants to be called forward and yet cheered on. It craves distinction but also desires effortless fit. Yet, being called rarely feels comfortable in spaces designed around sameness. At some point, it dawns on you, the constants ending down is costing you something precious. It's not just loneliness you feel. It's dilution. And while diluted versions of ourselves might be more widely accepted, they quietly disappear from their own essence. This is where transformation begins. You stop treating your differences as social defects and start recognizing them as spiritual insights. God does not define people through comparison. He names them in secret, without needing the crowd's approval before revealing their purpose. Those parts of you that made certain environments feel awkward weren't always weaknesses. Sometimes, they were signs you weren't made for every room, only for the right one. Being chosen often feels more like alienation than honor at first. But once your identity settles deeper than external approval, the need for universal understanding loosens. You no longer panic when a room fails to hold you. You begin asking a better question, not why don't I fit here, but what kind of space was I really designed to serve? The table no one else has filled. Loneliness can take many forms. There's a loneliness that waits for nightfall, not the broad, philosophical kind related to identity, but a tactile, domestic, and concrete loneliness. It looks like an empty chair across from you. A message thread that stays silent. A meal eaten without anyone asking about your day. A house that echoes with sound yet lacks companionship. That kind of loneliness seeps into your body. It's not just a thought, it's felt deeply in your chest, in the stillness before sleep, in the moment you want to share an honest word but realize there's no clear person to speak to. Because the ache feels so physical, the instinct is immediate: fill the void. Turn something on. Play music or TV. Scroll endlessly. Consume. Let the noise of the room drown out the soul's quiet. At first, this strategy helps. But only at first. Because distraction can engage your ears even while your heart starves. You can keep the room loud and still feel profoundly unheld. That's when loneliness becomes dangerous, not when the room is silent, but when silence starts to define your worth. If no one asks, maybe I don't matter. If no one notices, maybe I'm forgettable. If the seat stays empty long enough, perhaps emptiness becomes part of who I am. This is a lie, an ancient deception. And one of the clearest ways Jesus confronts this lie is through the hidden room. The place behind the closed door, where no one else sees you. The quiet sanctuary that speaks to your true worth apart from the world's applause. Imagine a place where no one is watching. No applause greets your every move. No one validates your efforts. But there, in the silence, your Father sees in secret. This simple phrase reshapes how we understand our worth. Our value isn't determined by who invites us to sit at their table. It's defined by the one who finds us even when there isn't a table at all. This truth stirs a tension within us. Our hearts crave intimacy with God, yes, but they also long to be missed by others. We yearn both for the secret, sacred moments and for the public affirmation that we still matter. This struggle isn't laziness. It's hunger. The fear isn't just loneliness. It's the dread of being forgotten. That fear begins to influence our choices in subtle ways. It shapes how much we try to prove ourselves, how much we over-explain, and how often we reach out from a place of pain instead of healing. Yet, if the table remains empty for long enough, something shifts. The silence no longer feels like a judgment but becomes an invitation. The chair once empty transforms into an altar. The absence of an audience creates the space for genuine honesty. Prayer loses its rehearsed tone, becoming raw and heartfelt. Scripture stops being a source of quick inspiration and becomes a lifeline. Tears come freely, without the need for explanation. In this raw, unfiltered space, God's presence moves beyond a mere idea. The hidden room morphs into a unique kind of feast, not one filled with noise and applause, but one rich with internal reward stability. clarity, and a strange, enduring strength. This strength arises when you no longer require public recognition to stay spiritually grounded. Loneliness may not disappear, but its texture changes. It no longer holds authority over you. You're no longer waiting at that empty table to prove your worth. You've been met on a deeper level, and once you've been encountered there, that room doesn't feel quite so empty anymore. When distance becomes protection, loneliness takes on a new meaning. It shifts from accidental to intentional. You notice invitations still come your way, but every time you say yes, something inside you diminishes. Some environments seem open but leave you depleted. Certain people reach out, yet, after being with them, you feel more disconnected from yourself than before. This is a different kind of loneliness, not from having no one around, but from realizing that some kinds of belonging no longer fit who you're becoming. That realization demands honesty. You're not merely sad. You're restrained. Not because you're unwanted, but because a part of you is being protected. Daniel lived within this tension. Babylon offered him opportunity, structure, influence, agitation, and access, but it also carried subtle pressures to rename him, reshape him, retrain his desires, and absorb him into a system that would slowly alter his identity. His earliest victories weren't grand public miracles. They were quiet attacks of restraint, silent refusals, and invisible boundaries. His separation was not an act of superiority but a preservation of self. This was about survival. Esther understood a similar kind of hiddenness. Before she displayed any public bravery, she existed within layers of concealment, carefully chosen timing, restraint, and preparation. What appeared to be mere waiting was actually a process of intense formation under pressure. Joseph experienced preservation more through distance than comfort. He had to leave certain places behind to remain pure enough for what lay ahead. This isolation was not an act of cruelty, it was a form of insulation. Many people misinterpret this season. They think separation signifies rejection, fear, or social failure. But sometimes, distance is simply an act of wisdom. Not every open door leads to safety. Not every familiar room fosters health. Not every relationship that seeks access deserves it. The Spirit doesn't always warn us loudly. Often, He quiets our peace to alert us instead. This battle is fierce because the heart craves the comfort of old familiarity, while the soul senses a deep danger. Staying is emotionally easier, but leaving feels spiritually purer. This painful divide causes many to delay obedience under the guise of kindness. They keep returning to places that sap their strength because the grief of leaving seems too high a price to pay. Yet clarity grows each time we stop mislabeling preservation. We start to see that God isn't withholding life from us. Instead, He's protecting something tender, a forming purpose, a vulnerable calling, a conviction still maturing that could shatter if exposed too soon to the wrong environment. Viewed this way, loneliness transforms. It ceases to be about exclusion and becomes about preservation. You're not kept away because you are weak. You're guarded because what's developing within you isn't ready to be handled carelessly. One day, you'll thank God for these boundaries that once felt like deprivation. There's a certain kind of fire that doesn't show up in crowds. It waits for silence. It waits until there's nowhere left to perform, nowhere left to hide, nowhere left to outsource your identity. Loneliness creates that quiet chamber. Stay in it long enough, and what's been buried starts to surface: old wounds, excused habits, thought patterns left unaddressed because noise masked them. At first, the impulse is to escape more movement, more noise, more consumption, anything but stillness. Stillness becomes aggressive because it exposes what comfort helped you avoid. Anxiety creeps in. Old temptations begin to sound reasonable again. Shame tries to convince you that the exposure means you failed spiritually. You wonder if the discomfort itself signals something wrong with you. But fire in Scripture isn't just about destruction, it's about revelation. Gold isn't ruined by heat, it's refined. What's hidden becomes visible. Elijah didn't find God in loud spectacle. He found him after the shaking, in a quiet voice that required stillness. Exposure doesn't equal humiliation. God reveals to heal. The fire of solitude is not there to shame you for your weaknesses. Instead, it brings those weaknesses into the open, into a place where grace can finally reach them, grace that performance once kept guarded and hidden. This is why this stage feels so intensely personal. Alone. The borrowed parts of your faith, the ones you leaned on but never fully owned, begin to crack. You start to see where your discipline depended more on structure than on genuine desire, where your confidence was built on routine rather than deep conviction, and where your language about God, though sincere, had not yet grown deep roots. In that moment, shame might try to take the lead. You might think, if only I were stronger, this wouldn't feel so hard. But that kind of thinking misses the point entirely. Difficulty doesn't mean you're failing. Exposure doesn't signal defeat. Instead, as you move through this, confession begins to replace the constant effort to manage your image. Honesty starts to take the place of mere performance. Scripture shifts from being decorative words to becoming a lifeline, utterly necessary. Prayer slows down, grows weightier, and gains truth. The fire of solitude doesn't shrink you. It clears you. And that clarity changes your understanding of strength. No longer is strength about looking composed in front of others. It transforms into knowing who remains when all your usual supports fall silent. Loneliness did not reveal your weaknesses to disqualify you. It uncovered them so that God could stop dealing with just the surface symptoms and finally reach the deepest roots of your heart. This is not punishment. This is purification. There is, however, a hidden danger when solitude turns into a story you tell yourself against yourself. Over time, if you're not careful, loneliness ceases to be a temporary season and morphs into a fixed narrative. You might stop reaching out because you wrongly assume no one wants to hear from you. Or you stop asking for help because you're weary of feeling like a burden. You tell yourself you're fine, but the walls around you keep growing thicker, and what were once moments of distance become hardened habits. This is where sacred solitude can quietly warp into harmful isolation, not because God has changed the season, but because your interpretation of it has become rigid and heavy. Think of Jacob on the run. He understood that raw, exposed alliances. No crowd, no comforting words, no clear future, only uncertainty and a stone for a pillow. Yet it was precisely in that stripped-down moment that heaven broke through. Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. That statement matters deeply because awareness does not create God's presence. It recognizes it. Loneliness doesn't remove him. It reveals how seldom we noticed him when life was noisy and full. Still, spiritual formation is uncomfortable. It challenges withdrawal habits, confronts the assumptions of rejection, and battles the impulse to pull back before others even get the chance to show up. There's a dangerous cycle there, pushing people away, then mourning the distance as proof that no one came near. God intervenes not by forcing continuous companionship but by teaching a new foundation. Approval is not the oxygen of life. Presence is. You begin the journey of discovering who you are without constant feedback. You start receiving love without needing to earn it through usefulness or emotional display. Your posture changes. You no longer cling as tightly. You don't shut down as fast. You learn the sacred difference between holy solitude and isolating loneliness. Let's explore a profound journey that many of us experience. At some point, a shift from feeling like happiness lies in blending in, to realizing that true connection comes from embracing our wholeness, even when it sets us apart. Initially, the hidden, quiet places we retreat to might feel like mere escapes. But, over time, those places become transformative spaces of encounter, not escape. It's from this grounded place that genuine connection resurfaces, not born from desperation, but from a sense of completeness. Being different no longer feels like a flaw that needs fixing. There comes a remarkable stage in this journey where loneliness doesn't stem from silence or isolation. Surprisingly, it arises precisely because of contrast. You find yourself amidst people, in rooms buzzing with conversations, still part of social scenes, yet the values surrounding you start to feel alien. What once felt harmless now seems laden with weight. Jokes land differently, nuances emerge, and jokes that once earned laughs might now feel out of sync. The compromises that once appeared trivial suddenly feel significant. You begin to notice boundaries and lines that others seem oblivious to, and this heightened awareness brings a subtle but persistent pressure. You don't want to be the difficult one. You dread coming across as rigid or unyielding. So the temptation sneaks in to soften your edges just a little, to laugh along a bit more, to choose silence over honesty, to blur the lines enough to keep the peace and comfort intact. But even the smallest compromises leave traces, a kind of quiet sadness. There's a dissonance between the truth you carry inside and the way you act outwardly. Jesus described his followers as salt and light, not mere background decorations. Salt influences the flavor, changes what it touches. Light illuminates and reveals what's hidden in darkness. Neither salt nor light fulfill their purpose by disappearing or fading into the background. This truth tells us that pursuing holiness often feels socially costly before becoming spiritually stabilizing. The inner struggle here is intense. You crave relationship without sacrificing integrity. You want to be loved, yet not if it means watering down who you truly are. The temptation is constant to dim your brilliance just enough to stay comfortably included. But over time, the real pain no longer springs from rejection by others. It blossoms from betraying yourself. And then, a remarkable clarity emerges. What once singled you out may be precisely what empowers you to make a difference. Your distinctiveness isn't always a flaw to be managed or hidden. Often, it's a responsibility to nurture and steward. Influence rarely grows from imitation. It grows from unwavering consistency. And consistency frequently demands sacrificing close proximity before it starts bearing fruit. If your circle shrinks because your light burns brighter and clearer, that isn't always social failure. Sometimes, it's the price of refusing to compromise what God is calling you to make holy. There are seasons when God seems to conceal what he eventually plans to entrust. In these times, loneliness feels less like distance and more like delay. Doors remain closed, opportunities pass you by, while others move forward with visible success, all while your life seems quietly paused in plain sight. You remain faithful, continue to pray, keep doing what you know to do, but outward progress feels stalled. During these hidden seasons, comparison becomes a poisonous temptation. You wonder, why does my obedience seem invisible? Why do others advance while I appear stuck? Consider David. After being anointed king, he spent years hiding in caves. Chosen, yet concealed. Marked by purpose, yet living in obscurity. That hiddenness was not punishment but mercy, because too early exposure could have crushed the delicate process of growth and protection that secrecy afforded. Jesus himself often withdrew, seeking solitude amid ministry. Paul, too, stepped back into obscurity before his wider work unfolded. God's timing in hiding is intentional. The internal conflict in these concealed seasons is fierce because waiting feels like stagnation, especially when the reasons remain unclear. Yet these hidden moments are part of a divine process, a preparation for the fruitfulness to come. What exactly is being preserved in seasons of waiting and silence? Bitterness rushes in with quick answers. If God truly wants me to move forward, why am I still stuck? Why does he remain hidden? But this hiddenness, unlike exposure, offers lessons that shape us deeply. It refines our motives, humbles our ego, and teaches us to obey without applause or recognition. It reveals whether we truly desire God's will or are simply chasing the emotional reward of being seen doing good. Protection can often feel like restriction at the moment, until hindsight eventually reveals its purpose. But hindsight isn't accessible in real time, faith is. God isn't blocking your future. Rather, he's shielding the future from reaching you before you're ready to handle it. Even when nothing seems to be happening, Something precious is being guarded: your heart, your motives, your ability to carry influence without being consumed by it. When the season finally changes and it will, you won't rush forward drawn, desperate for validation. You'll step forward preserved and prepared. In moments when faith feels parched and God seems silent, there's a deeper loneliness than mere social isolation, the loneliness born of spiritual numbness. You keep praying, reading scripture, showing up, but nothing seems to penetrate your soul. No warmth, no reassurance, no emotional confirmation. Just dry obedience moving quietly through empty air. This is often where panic sets in. Have I lost God? Has He abandoned me? Was my faith ever genuine? Society often teaches us to equate feeling with closeness to God. So when emotions fade, doubts rush in to fill the void. But the Psalms defy this lie. Job speaks to it as well. Faithful voices of the past cried out in silence long before us. Integrity remained long after sensation disappeared. This is where faith matures beyond emotion. It becomes sustained by choice, loyalty, and truth. You keep showing up not because it feels rewarding but because it is real. This kind of faith isn't flashy. It is deeply rooted. Roots grow unseen underground, where no one applauds. God's presence doesn't always announce itself emotionally. Sometimes, it quietly sustains you in a way only endurance can prove. The night of the soul doesn't mean God has abandoned you. It often proves that your faith is diving deeper than feelings can support. When emotions do return, as they often do, they find a faith that no longer crumbles without them. Then there are two voices to distinguish: the voice that accuses and the voice that guides. Loneliness is never truly silent if no one else speaks. Your thoughts will. They echo the same condemnations, repeating until they feel true. You're behind. You don't belong. Something is wrong with you. Nobody needs you. These thoughts are dangerous because they sound calm and reasonable. They masquerade as realism. Yet the shepherd's voice carries a different tone: not condemnation, but direction; not confusion, but clarity; not paralysis, but movement. Jesus said his sheep recognize his voice. Loneliness, then, is not just a season to survive, but a school of discernment. Which voice will you let hold authority? The accusing voice shrinks your perspective and turns inward. The shepherd's voice, even when correcting, anchors you firmly while leading you forward. Accusations lose their sting with honesty. Gratitude cuts through misunderstanding. Confession brings secret thoughts into the light. Over time, lies don't necessarily vanish, but their impact lessens. They no longer carry the same weight. The atmosphere shifts. Loneliness stops feeling like a courtroom where you're constantly judged. It starts to feel like a peaceful meadow, where a shepherd gently guides you to move calmly, without panic. When the right people cease to be your oxygen and instead become the fruit you savor, everything changes. Gradually, you notice a new pattern. Not every relationship nourishes you, even if you have many. Some drain you, leaving you more fragmented than whole. Some demand far more than they ever return. Recognizing this tempts you to seek better connections at any cost. You may lower your standards, overlook the imbalance, or accept being merely tolerated rather than truly known. But Scripture insists that alignment matters more than mere proximity. Jesus chose relationships with purpose, not just companionship. Ruth didn't scramble for rescue. She walked faithfully until the right connection blossomed within true alignment. This realization transforms your outlook. You stop treating people like oxygen essential for survival but instead see healthy relationships as fruit, enriching but not life-supporting. They complement your purpose. They don't replace it. New relationships feel different, less dramatic, more mutual, less about performance, more about steadiness. You're no longer begging to be understood. You are recognized. And that recognition brings a calm far deeper than fleeting excitement ever did. Yet, being chosen carries a cost. Calling, by its nature, demands social sacrifice. At some point, Your obedience discomforts certain people not due to conflict, but because your path no longer aligns with theirs. Jeremiah understood this pain well. His faithfulness brought isolation. But paradoxically, as obedience became more costly, God's presence became more steady and sure. This is an unspoken battle. Many face: a desire for affirmation, but an even greater desire for integrity. You want to be understood, but not at the expense of watering down the message you've been entrusted with. Compromise seems merciful in the moment, yet it brings grief heavier than loneliness. Because then, you're not just alone, you're divided within. So hard truths settle in. Approval fades. Popularity shifts. But the calling remains, persistent and unyielding. It follows you into solitude, refusing to be silenced. And if you honor it, God's companionship becomes more constant than human applause ever was. This loneliness is not loss, it's alignment. You're preparing to carry a vision others cannot yet see. Eventually, the season begins to make sense, not all at once, but enough. Looking back, you realize the isolation had form. It taught you patience, honesty, and how to remain with discomfort without fleeing. These are leadership muscles, though they don't feel like leadership as they develop. Joseph's solitary nights built restraint long before his influence became evident. Jesus' time in obscurity cultivated depth before the weight of public life arrived. Solitude didn't disqualify them, it prepared them to carry the calling they were destined for. Imagine standing at the crossroads of your life, burdened yet unbroken by the weight of responsibility. This begins your new story, a transformation where tears turn into training, delay molds discipline, and silence becomes your classroom. What once seemed like setbacks or failures now reveal themselves as the very journey preparing you for your future. This is your pivotal challenge. How will you respond to loneliness? Will it harden your spirit or deepen your soul? Will it isolate you or equip you for greater things? Leadership in God's economy doesn't thrive on exposure first. It roots itself in responsibility. And responsibility flourishes best in quiet moments where God can speak directly to your soul. Suddenly, loneliness ceases to be a random affliction, it becomes intentional, a sacred stillness before a breakthrough. You begin to understand that what you've endured wasn't rejection but deliberate selection. God did not discard you, He set you apart. And this separation, it wasn't the end but a preparation for a leadership forged in depth, not clamor. You've walked through many unreturned messages, invisible seasons, prayers left unanswered, harsh accusations, empty rooms, unoccupied tables, numb nights, and places where you never quite belong. Yet, here you stand, not erased or forgotten but refined. The loneliness that once seemed like punishment has been shaping your stamina, sharpening your discernment, cultivating empathy, bringing clarity, and increasing your capacity to bear weight. Look back at those quiet chapters of your life. They weren't void, they were workshops, classrooms, hidden sanctuaries where heaven instructed you without interruption. Every pause, every ache, every stretch of silence was active, preparing you to carry what noise never could. Now, your path forward is clearer. You no longer seek constant affirmation, you yearn for presence. And that presence has accompanied you all along, even when everything else felt absent. Each moment that felt like rejection was guiding you toward revelation. Each season of feeling unseen propelled your identity deeper. Move ahead with this profound clarity, not because life promised comfort, but because God promised purpose. The right people will come, but only when your center is strong enough to embrace them without idolizing them. Purpose must come first. Connection follows. So resist cursing the quiet. Instead, honor it. Allow it to complete its work. If this season has shaped you, give it a name. Share your experience. Let others know they're not alone in their solitude. What God builds in hidden places is rarely small. And whatever follows this loneliness will make greater sense because of it, not despite it.